All right, folks, I've got 6:30 on the dot. Welcome to the night 3 of our Master Beef Fall webinar series. It's Mallory again. I'll be your host tonight, and we're super excited to have you again. Tonight, we have Miss Kristen Walker here from the Tennessee Farm Bureau Federation. She's the Associate Director of Public Policy there, and she's here to talk with us tonight, and we're super excited to have her. So we'll get this show on the road like we normally do, and I'll give the floor to Miss Kristen.
Thank you, Mallory. And good evening, everybody. Real quickly, I'm gonna share my screen, so bear with me just one second. Okay, can everybody see that? Is my PowerPoint up, Mallory? Okay, awesome. Well, good evening. Like Mallory said, my name is Kristen Walker, and I have the pleasure of working in the Public Policy Division at Tennessee Farm Bureau, where I focus on commodity issues and industry relations, and then dabble a little bit in national affairs. And Mallory and Katie had asked me to give an issues update, so buckle up. If you like policy, I'm here to inundate you with plenty of it. There's lots to cover, and if you have any questions, I'm going to breeze through quite a few different topics, but feel free to ask any questions either now or afterwards, and I'm happy to share those with you. But before I get into the actual issues themselves, I figured I'd give a little bit of a background on who we are at Farm Bureau and what we do. I'm hoping that a lot of you are familiar with who we are and the fact that we do a little bit more than just sell insurance, but nonetheless, I'm still going to take just a second to explain about where we came from and how we got to where we are. So first things first, our organization was founded 102 years ago now, when a group of farmers realized that there was not a voice for them in Nashville and in Washington, D.C., advocating for the needs of farmers in the rural communities here in the state, and realized that if anyone was going to do that for them, it was going to be the farmers themselves. And so some farmers from around the Columbia area started this organization with the goal of providing grassroots policy and for the ag community to have a voice. From there, Tennessee Farm Bureau has continued to meet needs of farmers in multiple different ways. We started a livestock marketing company shortly after, and then the two insurance companies that we know and love, the mutual and life insurance companies, those were created because, again, there was a need in the community to get farms covered. Farming is a risky business, and insurance companies were just simply not insuring farms. And so again, the idea was, well, if no one's going to do it for us, why don't we do it ourselves? And thus our lovely insurance companies were created, with the start of being just for the ag community and for farms. That's where you don't have to be a farmer to have Farm Bureau insurance comes from, because at one point you did. But it became so popular and such a beloved company that then it was expanded to just citizens of the state of Tennessee. So we're really proud of those companies. We have a health insurance company, provide tax services for farms and other folks. And so that idea of just filling the needs of farming community, the rural and farm communities of the state continued. We're really proud, and it's on this slide, of our mission statement that was adopted in 1923 and hasn't changed since then. That kind of perfectly reflects why we're here, and that's to develop, foster, promote, and protect programs for the general welfare, including economic, social, educational, and political well-being of farm people of the great state of Tennessee. And we kind of feel like that has always perfectly described what we do. And we're really proud to have that mission statement that's continued to be strong and continue to be true for us here. And although the services we provide have expanded, our main objective is still to be the voice of agriculture in Nashville and in Washington, D.C., and to protect our ag community and make sure that farming remains a viable occupation. So with that, we have a tried and true policy development process. that's lengthy, but we like to think it's pretty thoughtful. So on this left diagram, it goes through our year-long process, and I'm just going to take a couple minutes to explain that, just so you get a general understanding of why we have policies the way we do and where they come from. So beginning all year long, our members are discussing within their county farm bureaus, which we have in every county in the state, and they consist of farmers. You guys may be some of them. If you are, we love it. You probably know some of those board members that are on the county farm bureau board in your county, because we pride ourselves in the fact that those county boards consist of the farming community of whatever county. So those folks are talking all year long about issues affecting them in their communities and across the state, and continuing to stay abreast of what's happening in the ag world. And then in the summertime, in late summer, which we actually finished these up later in August, we will have a series of 12 meetings where members get to surface issues. And these occur in 12 regional town hall style policy development meetings. And essentially we our staff, the Farm Bureau staff, take notes and listen to what issues our members are telling us are pertinent to them, whether it's new issues, new and emerging things that have happened that we need to be aware of, what's working in our policy that we need to continue, what's not working in our policy, and any changes to those existing policies that voting delegates will eventually vote on. So it's kind of the place to bring all of the issues up, to kind of bring to the forefront what's happening in the ag community right now. And so we just finished those up at the end of August, and now we're in the compiling information mode. So we take notes, we diligently take notes about what everyone tells us, and we come back with a survey to send out to our county farm bureaus where our members answer some questions about those issues that were surfaced. We'll ask them some pointed questions based on what we heard, and kind of try to initially poll our membership to see where they might be landing on different issues. So it's a long survey. If you've been a part of it, October is not a fun month to be a county farm bureau board member because it's a long survey, but they take the time needed to sit down and deliberate about all these different issues that have been brought up through the year. So once we get all this survey information, in November, our state resolutions committee meets together, and this is a group of about 25 or 30 farmer members from across the state who participate in different Farm Bureau leadership roles, whether it be a county Farm Bureau president, a Young Farmers and Ranchers member, a Farm Bureau Women's member, or a member of our commodity advisory committees. These folks get together and they read through every page of this policy book that is on the slide and also in my hand, and they read it word for word. And the goal of that is to read it word for word and take whatever was said in those policy development meetings, what was said in the surveys we wrote, and make sure that what's in this book lines up with what was discussed. And if it's not, or needs to be added to in different areas, make recommendations for changes. So they take a long time. It's a long 2 days in November. And it's a really long process, but they come up with recommendations to send to our voting delegates, which those folks converge on Franklin in early December, the first weekend in December, where we have our annual convention and business session, where 3 voting delegates from each state participate in our business session and vote on those policy recommendations that the resolutions committee brought forth, as well as any other ones from commodity advisory committees or from anyone that's from the floor. So any suggestions come forward at that meeting, and at the end of that meeting, our policy is adopted, and as it is in this book. And so this book right here, it says on there, was adopted December 6th, 2022. That was the end of our convention, and from there on, this is kind of, not to be sacrilegious, but this is Farm Bureau's Bible for the next year. From that, when we establish our policies for the upcoming year, our board of directors, our state board of directors, will hear from our public policy team, my counterparts, what are expected issues to be brought forward in the state legislature in the upcoming year, and we'll establish some priority issues based on those, what we can expect. And from that, our lobbying team, which consists of my counterparts, Kevin Hensley and Shelby Benoit, they use these priorities to lobby for and against legislation brought forth, and use our policy book to also track and address other issues that come up that we may not have been expecting. So long process. And the reason I bring all of that up is to say that when Farm Bureau has a policy position, it's not my opinion, it's not our president Eric Mayberry's opinion, it's not my counterparts Kevin and Shelby's opinion. It is those positions have gone through an extensive process that is a grassroots process of our farmer members to establish our positions on issues, from anything related to different commodities, rural living, education, you name it. If it affects rural life in Tennessee, we probably have a position on it. And that position was set forth by our grassroots process. So it's an exhausting and a long process, but we're really proud of it and we think it really works. And I'll get to show you a good example or two of how that process worked in action in different issues as we go forward. So without further ado, since I spent a minute describing that process, I figure now is the perfect time to kind of talk about some different state issues that have happened and that we were following this year. But first, I want to kind of rewind to 2022 and look at what we consider to be one of our most major successes in the ag industry that we were privileged to be a part of. We were able to pass the modernization of agricultural sales tax in Tennessee, which took effect on January 1st of 2023. This process before I'm sure if any of you have tried to go buy ag equipment at your retailer, you're never really sure what you can use your exemption card for and what you can't. So now it's a much simpler process. Much more of your ag products are included, and we don't have to go pass a bill to add every single new thing that comes along that we want to make a sales tax exempt. There's more of a blanket exemption for ag products and things used for agricultural use. So we're really excited about that. We think this is a major tax saving for farmers across the state. And but with anything that's new, it's been in effect now for 8 months and 9 months. And with anything that's new, there are going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some issues. I'm sure folks on this call have had confusions with this new sales tax modernization. And if that is the case, please let us know. And we have been constantly talking with the Department of Revenue to work through the issues, kind of figure out how it's actually working at the local level with your retailers, and want to make sure that it works to its full potential. So what it is, you will have sales tax exemptions with an exemption card on land, buildings, machinery used in the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock, and activities carried out in connection with the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock. And then of course you can see there where the definition of what farm products and nursery stock includes. So that covers a lot of things. What it does not cover, though, are these few things. Automobiles, trucks, household appliances, like if you have a refrigerator in your shop, gasoline and diesel fuel used in highway vehicles are things that are still not included, but this is a much smaller list of what's not included than there was before. So we think if there's any more questions, if you have any confusion about it, if there's any issues, we want to hear from you. That QR code will take you to the tax manual on the Department of Revenue's website that can list out, it has much more specific details on how it works if you want more information from that. So that was just one thing I kind of wanted to flash back into the past and pat ourselves on the back a little bit for, but this came about because we continue to hear from our members and we continue to hear from the ag community that this was something that needed to happen. And we were really fortunate to be one of the players in getting this passed in 2022. Moving on to 2023, we were pleased to move forward with 2 pieces of legislation related to 2 priority issues we had this year, with the first being a state constitutional amendment to prohibit a statewide property tax. This does not impact a local government's ability to have implement property taxes, but we think that the potential for the state to ever implement a statewide property tax should be off the table completely. Tennessee has been fortunate. We've been fiscally healthy for a long time and haven't collected a property tax since 1947 at the state level. And there's no concern in the short term that would ever happen again. The state's not saying they want to do that, but we just want to make sure that our members have told us, we want to make sure that this is not something that when the state of Tennessee gets into a time of fiscal stress, when things aren't looking as good fiscally for the state, which will probably happen someday, we don't want the burden to fall on the backs of property owners. You all as property owners already pay enough in property taxes at the county level, and just didn't think that this needed to be something that the state could implement down the line. This is when talking about constitutional amendments, it's a multi-year process, and that will eventually lead to a vote on the governor's ballot. But before then, this resolution passed in the House this past year in 2023. It will need to pass the Senate in 2024, and then if it does pass the Senate, both chambers, it has to pass again in the next General Assembly of 2025 and 2026 by a 2/3 majority before it then moves to the governor's ballot. So we're still really early in the process. It needed to begin this year in order to pass all of the tests in order to be put on the governor's ballot, but we've started that process and successfully passed it in the House. So we were excited about that. The second priority issue was related to greenbelt eligibility for land that's enrolled in conservation programs. There was a bill passed this year that ensures farms that are enrolled in a state or federal conservation program that ensures that they can maintain their greenbelt property tax status, which you all, I'm sure, are familiar with our greenbelt property tax status that gives you kind of reduced property tax rates for farmland. And this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier of our grassroots efforts at Farm Bureau, because this was a priority issue of ours because it came from an individual story in a county. So one of the stories we heard was a farmer who has land in 2 counties in West Tennessee had enrolled land in both of those counties in conservation programs. And in one county, the property assessor took that land out of greenbelt and assessed rollback taxes, which is what happens when a property is taken out of greenbelt. It's assessed rollback taxes for a certain time period. And in the other county, the property assessor didn't require the land to be pulled out of greenbelt. So 2 different things happened in 2 different counties for one landowner. When this was taken to an administrative law judge, the judge sided with the farmer, saying that the land should be able to maintain its greenbelt status. And because of this issue, it was brought forth through our process and then became a priority issue. And essentially, the landowner brought it to his legislator, and a bill was created and was passed to make sure that that's allowed in statute, that land that is enrolled in either your NRCS programs or state conservation programs can still maintain that greenbelt status, because the whole goal of the greenbelt is to maintain green space. And that's exactly what these conservation programs do, is maintain green space in the state of Tennessee. So really good example of how an individual story in a certain county can turn into policy in our organization and then turn into legislation that gets passed. So we were really, really pleased with that one also. Some other priority issues that we focused on this year was local government's ability to manage growth. And this was a huge hot topic in Nashville. While the state budget has been strong, like I said, many local governments are struggling to maintain their finances and avoid raising property taxes, like we said. There were lots of different discussions in Nashville around this topic, and specifically around the money that local government can collect in sales tax and a local government's ability to authorize an impact fee, which would impact anybody that moves to a county or a city on new housing developments. And so there was lots of conversation, multiple bills were filed, but ultimately there was no real agreement from all of the different players, the realtors, the home builders, the local governments, the city governments, those types of things. And so nothing was agreed on this year. There's lots of study happening around this topic of managing growth. And we highly expect something to come back in the upcoming legislative session in early 2024 related to this issue. And then another one that we're always really proud of, or proud to promote, are the Department of Agriculture's Ag Business Development programs. The Tennessee Ag Enhancement Program and Ag Enterprise Fund are both incredibly successful cost share programs in the state. I'm sure a lot of you have participated in one of those, and we always continue supporting funding for these programs in the budget. We know that they work, we know that they're beneficial, and there's some numbers to prove it. As you can see there, these programs have a significant impact on the state's economy, with each ag enhancement dollar contributing $6.55 to local economies, and every ag enterprise fund dollar generating $17.55 back to the local economy. So these work, and they're popular. Farmers are participating in them, businesses are participating in them, and so we of course support continued funding for those programs. Other legislative issues that kind of popped up that we weren't expecting, and there weren't our priority issues, but we were able to get behind and help get across the finish line. One was about farmers market food permits. So this allows for a farmer who sells at a farmer's market to cut and prepare their own produce to either give as samples or as prepared food products through a once-a-year permit from the Tennessee Department of Health. Previously, if you were wanting to do this at a farmer's market or multiple farmers markets, you'd have to get multiple permits a year, but this simplified that process. And for those folks who participate in farmers markets, the less paperwork, the better, the less red tape, the better. So this one was one we were happy to be a part of and happy to support. And the second one we are really proud of has to do with de-annexation. De-annexation has been an issue for the ag community for many, many years, and is something we have wanted to work toward in the legislature since annexation by ordinance was abolished in 2014. This issue particularly may not affect you, or it may not affect a huge number of farmers across the state, but for those farms who it does affect, it's got a huge impact. Thanks to this bill, this legislation, there's a process for those farmers who are along a municipal boundary and meet certain qualifications, the ability to de-annex. If they were annexed by ordinance prior to 2014, it gives them ability to de-annex, and that's a huge cost saving for those farmers. So it's a small group of farmers that will end up qualifying for this, but for those who do and are able to de-annex, it's a huge cost saving for them. So every year the governor proposes a budget which has to be passed by the General Assembly. And there are always some highlights that relate to agriculture, and I'm just going to breeze through these really quickly. I just talked about the Ag Enterprise Fund and the Ag Enhancement Fund. The Ag Enterprise Fund saw an increase in their budget, raising it to $15 million non-recurring and $1.5 million recurring, which is a huge increase in the funding that program was getting. And then Ag Enhancement was fully funded at $26 million. For the 2023-2024 budget. Moving on there, as we have seen with continued pressures on animal emergencies, I'm sure y'all have heard about the disease outbreaks in poultry with highly pathogenic avian influenza and other issues with animal emergencies. The state's vet's office has been asking for increased funding in more positions to be able to meet those needs. And there was some funding that was able to go to them to be able to do that, which is huge for those issues that for dealing with with highly pathogenic avian influenza. But we also know that foot and mouth disease is just around the corner. It's not here in the country, in the US yet, but it's not a matter of if, but when. And when that time comes and there is an animal disease outbreak, being able to be prepared to have the staffing to respond to that in the state vet's office is crucial. And then outside of that, as you can see there, the Department of Agriculture's Forestry Division kind of was seeing the same struggles with different wildfires and other forest management duties. They were able to get $3 million more to increase their staff salaries, and then more money towards TDA's Animal Health Lab. Just a couple others. The budget also allocated funding for 5 new state parks across existing state properties in Tennessee, and then allocated $900 million for 6 new TCAP facilities and improvements to existing facilities, which are obviously really good for that workforce training. So, as you can tell, state issues have kept Kevin and Shelby pretty busy this legislative session, but I think if they were here, they'd agree with me that it was a successful one. There was lots of drama in the news as it relates to Tennessee's General Assembly, but nonetheless, we were able to get some good things done in agriculture and work with our partners to get those things done. And they were really, I think they would say they were pleased with the outcome of session, and we're already looking forward to the next one. But I'm going to move on to some federal issues. And before I do that, I think it's kind of important to lay out what we're working with in DC. As you can see, the 118th Congress is about as split as they come. The Senate is Democrat-led with 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans, and the House is Republican-led with 222 Republicans and 213 Democrats. So we have a split Congress with one party dominating one chamber, and then the margins within each chamber are extremely narrow. So this means voting on anything will be tough. I'm sure lots of you remember the drama around electing a House Speaker that happened months ago, where just a few people were able to keep that vote from happening. And it just kind of goes to show what we'll have to work with. It provides its own set of challenges, but it's always good to know what we're working with when discussing the hot button issues at the federal level. More specifically, looking at agriculture leadership, these are the 4 key names in House and Senate agriculture right now. We like to call these folks the 4 corners of ag. They're important no matter what year, but eyes are on them particularly this year because it's a Farm Bill year, and I will talk a little bit more about that. But on the House side, we're really fortunate to have Chairman G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania leading the charge. He is a great champion for agriculture. He's got a dairy background. And just back in the end of June, we were fortunate to have him here in the state of Tennessee for a Farm Bill listening session that we hosted along with the Department of Agriculture. And we got to put him on some Tennessee farms. He even got to ride a Tennessee walking horse, see a dairy, see some operations that really kind of encompass Tennessee agriculture and how diverse it is. And so we were really excited to have him, and he's just really gassed up to get a Farm Bill done efficiently and effectively. And so we're happy to have him in that role. And then, of course, his right-hand man is longtime Ag Committee member David Scott from Georgia. He brings a wealth of knowledge to the Farm Bill writing process, and their roles actually just switched with the change in the House being run by Republicans instead of Democrats. And so he's got lots of experience leading the House Ag Committee, and we're just fortunate to have him. On the Senate, we also were fortunate to have 2 Tennessee representatives, John Rose and Scott Desjardins, sitting on the House Ag Committee. So we have a good voice for Tennessee agriculture on that committee. Scott Desjardins, I think, is actually the 3rd ranking member as far as how long he's been on the committee. And John Rose was just added this year to the House Ag Committee. So we're really excited to have a good representation for agriculture on the House Ag Committee. On the Senate side, Debbie Stabenow from Michigan is at the helm, and she is a seasoned professional in the Senate Ag Committee. She's actually not seeking re-election this year and really wants one last farm bill to pass as a feather in her cap before she steps down in that role. So that's good news for us because that means there's motivation, there's some real strong motivation to get a farm bill passed. And then, of course, John Bozeman from Arkansas is the ranking member in the Senate, and he's a great champion for ag as well. Before diving into the Farm Bill, I like to highlight this consumer survey that American Farm Bureau conducted earlier this year because I think it just brings into focus why we need to share our story and how consumers feel about what we do and the issues that we hold so near and dear. Although the media can make it seem otherwise, farmers are still highly, highly trusted. They're one of the highest, most trusted occupations in America, with 89% of people saying that they trust farmers and what they do. That's sometimes hard to remember in the midst of all of the social media and how everything is getting questioned for how things are grown in this country and in the ag industry. But nonetheless, there's still a high trust in agriculture amongst consumers out there. However, this slide shows that the issues leading the way for consumers right now are food inflation, followed by food insecurity and immigration reform. In other words, the public really likes when their food is cheap and readily available. And we have American agriculture to thank for that. We're the most efficient at producing food. And as you can tell, when food prices rise, the consumers feel it. They like those reasonable food prices. They like when it's available. So what we're doing works, and when there's inflation and when there's food insecurity, our consumers don't like it. And finally, I think the one that I think is most important is this slide, and that is when adults were asked how much they know or have seen about the Farm Bill, 71% of adults said they had not seen much of anything or anything at all related to the Farm Bill. And I think this gives us in the ag sector a really great opportunity to share our stories and explain why the Farm Bill is so important. It's the single most important piece of legislation that is passed for the agriculture industry, and it's really important as to why our farmers need it and what it does for our industry. And there's a real great opportunity there to share that with consumers and make them understand and help them to understand its benefit. And that's going to be important because we have every 5 years the Farm Bill is up for reauthorization, and 2023 is the year for that. The Farm Bill's impact obviously extends beyond just protecting our nation's food supply. It provides millions of jobs. It ensures access to nutrition for families who are food insecure. It protects farms from risks like weather disaster. It advances conservation efforts, and it helps spur innovation through ag research. It's multifaceted. But it presents its own set of challenges this year because, as you can see from the slide, this is the first time that a farm bill has $1 trillion price tag, which is a lot of money to us folk. But in the general sense of the budget, $1 trillion, not a whole lot. But it is the first time this a farm bill has had over $1 trillion price tag. And I think it's important to note that, as you can see from the graph, $1.2 trillion of the projected $1.5 trillion budget for the Farm Bill goes toward the nutrition title or the SNAP programs, with the farm programs being those other small slivers of the pie. And I will talk a little bit more about that and why that's important with American Farm Bureau's priority issues for the year. Kind of like we do with our state priority issues, American Farm Bureau establishes some priority issues of their own for the Farm Bill when a Farm Bill comes up to be reauthorized. And here are their main priorities. The first one is increasing the baseline for Farm Bill program spending. The general consensus of the voting members is that if there's any time to ask for more money for those core farm programs, it's now. And with emphasis on the farm program spending, not just the overall Farm Bill funding. Because to make sure that those the meat of the Farm Bill that is important to the ag industry is what's would be getting increased funding. Another priority that our members have established is maintaining a unified Farm Bill, keeping nutrition and farm programs together. If you've heard anything about the Farm Bill, it's probably been surrounding SNAP and the amount of money spent in SNAP. And keeping these programs together has been a sticky subject in the news, but American Farm Bureau members, Tennessee Farm Bureau members believe in keeping these programs together because they believe in telling and the wonderful story it tells of supporting those who grow our food and those who are food insecure in this country with the same legislation. And then also, if we want to get a little more realistic with it, quite frankly, with the increased urbanization we're seeing across the country, fewer and fewer congressional districts are strictly rural. And so if these two programs were separate and we were looking at passing just a farm programs bill, it would be hard to pass because fewer and fewer of the legislative elected officials have strong rural districts, have rural representation to get that passed. So keeping them together tells that really wonderful story, but also makes sure that both things get supported at the same time. The third priority is prioritizing funding for risk management tools through both crop insurance and our commodity program and the commodity programs within the Farm Bill. Like I said, those are the meat of the farm programs and need to stay viable and robust. And then finally, ensuring adequate USDA staffing capacity and technical assistance. If Farm Bill really doesn't matter and doesn't mean a whole lot of anything if there isn't adequate staffing at the local level to help implement it. And this was kind of brought forth through the COVID pandemic when staffing was such an issue, and brought this forward as a priority issue to result in it being where it is. So like I said, sharing the story of why we need a Farm Bill passed is super, super important. September 30th is the deadline for getting the Farm Bill reauthorized, and all signs are pointing to getting an extension either through the end of the calendar year or into the spring. But nonetheless, we need to continue sharing that story of how important it is to get it passed. And so if that's something you're interested in, American Farm Bureau launched a campaign earlier this year called Farm Bill for America's Families. If you want to go to that website, farmbillforamericasfamilies.com, they've got some really great information, stats, graphics, and different things. But you can also, where it says get involved, your local cattlemen's organization, your local co-op board, your business, your farm can sign on and show support for passage of the Farm Bill. And it's just a way to show just the many different entities who the Farm Bill impacts and how everyone's in support of getting it passed. There may be disagreements about small elements of the Farm Bill amongst groups, but as a whole, the getting passed is the goal, is the main key goal. Getting a Farm Bill reauthorized is everyone's goal. The nuances of the small parts of it might have differing opinions, but as a whole, this needs to get passed, and this effort that AFBF launched is one way to show that. Now, in other news that is not related to the Farm Bill whatsoever, one thing, farmers can now repair their own farm equipment. We know this has been an issue. Leaps and bounds have been made this past year on the topic of repairing equipment in your barns. American Farm Bureau has signed memorandums of understanding with these 5 dealers, John Deere, Case New Holland, AGCO, Kubota, and Klaus. And these agreements create a framework for farmers and independent repair facilities in every state to access technical manuals, tools, product guides to self-diagnose and self-repair their ag equipment. while still respecting intellectual property and legal requirements of the manufacturer. With these MOUs that American Farm Bureau signed, this represents about 3/4 of the ag machinery sold in the United States. So this was really a huge move. I'm sure any of you have had issue with having to go to your particular dealer to get your equipment repaired because of software and because of all of the technology surrounding the new equipment. And this is one way to try and combat that. And again, this is one of those things that's still also really new. So if this is something that you have tried to work with a local dealer and had issues, we want to know, American Farm Bureau wants to know they have periodic meetings with these retailers, with these equipment manufacturers to pulse check and make sure that these MOUs are working and that at the local level, we're seeing the benefits. And so if you guys have issues, please let us know. On to a topic of my favorite acronym of all time, and that's WOTUS, or Waters of the U.S. This has been a topic of the EPA's jurisdiction over waters of the U.S. has been an issue for many, many years. It seems as if every administration for the past few presidential administrations, we've swung the pendulum back and forth on how much jurisdiction the EPA has within the Clean Water Act. One administration will go one way, it will get challenged in court. The next administration will come in, change it, that will get challenged in court, and it's just been going back and forth for many, many, many years. But earlier this year, there was a huge step in the right direction when considering these water protections, because in a sweeping decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Sackett family in a case called Sackett versus EPA. This ruling addressed three major components of the Clean Water Act and the authority of the federal government, including their use of what they call the significant nexus test, which I'll talk about in a minute, the definition of waters of the United States and what waters actually qualify to be regulated by the federal government, and then the jurisdiction of wetlands within that. Essentially, the Supreme Court agreed that the EPA had completely overstepped their bounds of their jurisdiction within the Clean Water Act and made sure they knew it. They were very harsh in their response and their decision on how much the EPA had gone way too far. And this was a huge win for landowners across the country who knew that this was happening. This is something that the ag community has been fighting for a long time. But in typical EPA fashion, just a couple weeks ago, they published their amended rule in response to the Supreme Court's decision, in which they claimed to take the Supreme Court's considerations, but kind of missed the mark on a lot of things. In some ways they did. One of the Supreme Court's suggestions was to take away that significant nexus test, which I told you I would explain. This was a vague test that the EPA just kind of created through rulemaking. It's not laid out in the Clean Water Act whatsoever. It's not mentioned in the actual legislation at all. But it gave the EPA the authority to regulate waters that significantly affect waters deemed to be waters of the United States. So if there was a waters of the US right here, and there was a water right here that they decided significantly affected it, they could essentially regulate it. So they took that out. They took out any wording in this new rule that had significant nexus tests in it. And while we're glad they removed the use of this test, they did not successfully clarify and simplify the rule like they were asked to in other ways by the Supreme Court, and could have gone much further to improve the rule as a whole. So at this point, there's no legislative action to be taken, but this is something that's going to continue to develop. There's going to be ongoing discussion about this issue because as a whole, the ag community and other groups are not pleased with what the EPA responded with. American Farm Bureau is part of a group called the Waters Advocacy Coalition, and this group is a diverse bunch of organizations and companies that have been working to monitor water regulations, and they're going to continue to work on that because it did sort of miss the mark after this really great Supreme Court decision. Moving on, one Supreme Court ruling we were not pleased with was the court's decision to uphold California's Proposition 12 legislation, which was passed back in 2018. In short, this upheld decision requires pork sold in the state of California to come from pigs born to sows housed and grown in very specific ways that vary from current industry standards. In an effort to reverse some of these restrictions, there is a bill from Congresswoman Ashley Hinson in Iowa called the Ending Agricultural Trade Suppression Act, or EATS, if you're a acronym nerd like I am. This EATS Act focuses on whether or not state and local governments should be able to interfere with commerce in other states and the production of ag products in other states. And we're hoping that this makes it across the finish line here in this Congress. But why this is so important is for a few reasons. California has around 13% of the share in the pork market. So about 13% of pork produced in the United States goes to California. So any of that pork, no matter if it's grown right here in Columbia, Tennessee, or in Florida, or in New York, if it is sold in California, those pork producers in any other state have to comply with the rules that California laid out for housing regulations for those sows. And so this will cause those pork producers to have to bear costs in excess of thousands, if not millions of dollars to retrofit their facilities to match these regulations that California set forth in order to be able to still sell their meat to California. So because of that, we support this legislation that would, the EATS Act, that would uphold the constitutional right to a national marketplace for interstate commerce and protect consumer choice. That's what we like to preach. It's a consumer's right to buy to pick their food at the grocery store. Not the government telling them what they should and shouldn't purchase. But the perhaps more concerning issue surrounding this is that pork could simply be the tip of the iceberg. If one state can establish standards for production on any ag commodity, what's to say they won't do it for cattle production or any other livestock production or crop production, and tell you how you can raise your cattle in order to be sold in their state? This is just the tip of the iceberg. And we would hate to see our producers limited in where they can market their quality products because of barriers to interstate commerce like this one. So we're paying close attention to this. There are some efforts in Congress to attack this from the legislative side. Senator Haggerty's office has been involved in this. And we're just really curious to see what happens to try and curb this issue. Moving on, across the state, we've been hearing from producers who are feeling the strain of labor shortages. I'm sure you all are familiar with those. It's hard to find skilled ag labor anymore. It's hard to find labor in general anymore. In May, Tennessee Farm Bureau joined over 430 business associations in signing a letter drafted by the Liberty Campaign, which maybe this is one of the best acronyms I've ever heard. And it's Legal Immigration and Border Enforcement Reform This Year, or the Liberty Campaign. This is calling upon Congress to enact measures to improve the border issue and legal immigration system now, not years down the line. Ultimately, elected officials will have to negotiate what can secure the necessary votes. This is a really hot topic. You hear folks say that nothing is going to get passed on immigration reform until the border problem is secured. And this is probably one of the hottest topics, one of the most controversial, depending on who you talk to in Congress, is the issue of immigration reform and border reform. House Ag Committee Chairman G.T. Thompson and Ranking Member David Scott have put together a congressional working group on ag labor and to focus on workforce issues. This is a 14-member group made up of 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats, where they will seek input from stakeholders, employers, and workers, emphasizing the H-2A visa program, produce an interim report detailing the program's shortcomings and the impacts on food security, and then file a final report with recommendations to address flaws within the H-2A program. So we'll be very curious to see what happens there. Now, this might throw you off as to why I have a walking horse on the screen for a Master Beef talk, but bear with me because it does have, the issue has a potential to affect you all. There has been an effort to pass what is called the PAST Act, or Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act, which continues to seek a dangerous precedent for the walking horse industry. This bill, supporters argue that this would eliminate soaring, which is not legal in the first place within the walking horse industry, and it would basically do away with the walking horse industry and show process as it exists today if this legislation were to pass. We've been successful in not allowing that to happen for many, many different sessions of Congress, but it seems like every few years it comes back up. Every so often there's more folks that try to end this industry from under the guise of animal cruelty, even though it's one of the most regulated show industries in the world, if not the most regulated. And so why does this concern you all as cattle producers? It's for this. For many years, the walking horse industry has been the low-hanging fruit for animal rights activists. This industry exists outside of Tennessee, but it's a relatively small industry. And they have their sights set on doing away with the walking horse industry as we know it and regulating it to its ruin. But the goal is to move farther than that. Our concern is that it's just the tip of the iceberg. If they succeed with doing away with the walking horse industry, what's to say horse racing is next, then rodeos, and then eventually the livestock shows that affect you all and how so many of us, including myself, fell in love with ag as kids, which is in the show ring, showing livestock. If they can be successful in attacking the walking horse industry, so many of those other issues are next. And so that's why it's important for y'all to be paying attention to, because the minute we continue to battle this and continue to protect this industry that we love, we're very proud of the walking horse industry in Tennessee. But it is true that if this were to happen and the animal rights activists were to get what they want out of this effort, what's next? All of the different animal shows are just following. Anything related to entertainment as it comes to livestock or horses is next. So finally, I swear I'm wrapping up here, but the last issue I wanted to talk about is another one that on its head may not seem like it affects you all, but it has far-reaching implications. The EPA has been feeling pressure from environmental groups in the court system because they've not been compliant with requirements set forth in the Endangered Species Act as they relate to pesticide regulations. To combat this, they've developed an Endangered Species Act work plan that was released in late 2022, which will outline how they plan to fix this problem in a timely fashion. And what they're proposing is highly concerning for a few reasons. First, through what they call interim ecological mitigation, the EPA plans to reduce risk to all non-target species identified in the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, and reduce exposure to listed species. So they're focusing on listed species, but they're also looking outside of those listed species and the non-target species affected by pesticide use, and plan to do this by going after row crop uses of pesticides and make changes to pesticide registration reviews and new registrations as they come. Every so often, every pesticide has to go under review and be reviewed for re-registration, and they're using that opportunity to increase some of these risk assessments and address more risk and essentially add to their labels through these registration reviews. I skipped a slide there, sorry. They also want to establish pesticide use limitation areas for different listed species and hunker down on the pesticide use in those areas. This is kind of a hard map to see, but the areas in red are proposed pesticide use limitation areas. And it doesn't cover the whole state yet, but bear with me. I'll get to everybody here in just a minute. But this is not only that, but they want you to go to this website called Bulletins Live 2 to access bulletins with more detailed label instructions for specific pesticides if you're in one of these pesticide use limitation areas. And this is problematic for a lot of reasons, two of which being the areas in which they were proposing these rules and the folks that are in those, and then the fact that they're requiring farmers to go on a website when we know how terrible broadband access is across rural areas of Tennessee. So we participated in some comments earlier this year stating some of those issues and many more. If you want to go check out this website and just kind of play around with what they're requiring, that QR code will take you there. But this is just one of a multiple strategies that the EPA is proposing down the line. They have an herbicide strategy coming up that has to do with how they plan to address herbicides. They have one for fungicide. They have one for rodenticide, insecticide, you name it. They're gonna propose all of these different strategies on how to address listed species. But again, how does this affect you all as cattle producers? Of course, some of you may have diversified operations where you produce row crops and you spray some of the pesticides they're talking about, use the herbicides they're talking about, or you could potentially fall within one of those proposed pesticide use limitation areas. But what has the potential to have the most impact are what future listing plans that the Endangered Species Act that coming down the line. We have heard from the EPA that there are plans to list the monarch butterfly as a threatened species as soon as this year. And we know here in the state of Tennessee that the monarch butterfly's critical habitat is probably the entire state of Tennessee, if we're being honest. And so if that happens, not only will, I feel it has the potential to affect you spraying your pastures that your cattle eat on, hay fields, your yards, whatever the case may be. If the monarch butterfly becomes a listed species and it falls under some of these regulations that the EPA is wanting to set forth, the entire state of Tennessee could be underneath those regulations and not just that little map that I showed you before. So this hasn't happened yet, but it's just something to keep in mind that there are efforts to change how you can use the pesticides that we rely on so heavily to be able to be efficient in production agriculture in the state. There are some challenges that we are going to be facing going forward with that. And then real quickly, because I know I'm coming up on an hour here, I'm just going to go through if you've liked anything you've heard, you want to continue to be updated on what you've heard. Here's how you can stay in the loop, if you will. We are on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a YouTube channel. We have a website, TNFarmBureau.org. If you scan that QR code or go to our website, you can receive our In the Loop newsletter that goes over what we're doing as an organization, with some policy updates. And then if you're interested in getting legislative alerts when the General Assembly is in session, go to your county farm bureau and they can sign you up for email alerts every Friday. And you can get all of the updates you could ever want on anything policy related for us. And then we also have, if podcasts and radio are your style, we have our tried and true home and farm radio, which are short 5-minute snippets on different fun things. The Root of the Matter is a little bit of a longer podcast, and then Farm Bureau on the Hill goes into every week during the legislative session. My coworkers Shelby Vinoy and Amy Beckham sit down and talk through what's happened that week. I've gotten to do a national affairs podcast once. But we sit down and line out some of the issues I've talked about today. And so if you're interested in, if you like podcasts, check those out. And I highly recommend it because Shelby and Amy do a great job on those. And with that, we have finally arrived the end of the policy nerd in me, all of the things. If you ever need us, this is our team at Tennessee Farm Bureau Public Policy. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help you. We're here to provide you information. And I'm just happy to be here. So thank you for having me.
Great, Kristen. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We really appreciate it. I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat. If you want to go over those, I can read them out to you, or if you just click on that Q&A box, they should pop up.
Oh yeah, yep, I see them. The first one is, what are the advantages of de-annexation and who should one contact to start the process? That's probably one of the ones I am least familiar with, but from what I know about it, it is a cost saving because you're not part of the city, I think is the general consensus there. If you're along that municipal boundary of the city line, the annexation by ordinance made you still pay into the services provided that the city provides, and it takes you out of that. Now, like I said before, the folks that are qualified to do that are very few and far between. But if you want to give us a call, one of us a call, I'm sure we could talk you through and figure out whether or not your farm would qualify for that. And then it's a process in the county, through the county government to do that. Try New Holland and see. Yes, I know that AFBF is working with as many equipment manufacturers as they can to expand the right to repair MOUs, and I'm sure that New Holland is on their short list. And then thank you for the brief. I wish I had known more about the Ag Enhancement Program. I had no idea these programs were available. When I asked at the local co-op, I was told to inquire about the farm. Yes, I think in a general sense, it's sometimes, I think as an ag industry, I like to say we love to preach to the choir, and we're not really good at sharing our stories and our successes. And I think some of those bright spots of things that can really benefit farmers, like ag enhancement, sometimes go lost. If you've not heard it, if you're new, if you've just moved here, or if you've not been if you're not already familiar, sometimes those different programs that are really there to help our farmers kind of get missed. And so I totally agree, but and certainly I think it's always important to make sure we're continuing to spread like the good word of what's out there and what opportunities exist for ag. And yes, if the federal government's going to ask you to fill out a questionnaire every year, they should probably tell you what they have to provide for you back. I totally agree. I think if there are that might be the last one, but if there's any more, those are our cell phones actually, and on the slide, Kevin's, mine, and Shelby's, and then our emails. If there's anything else you think of afterwards, because I know I threw a lot at you in a short time, and I told Mallory I would send her the PowerPoint slides for you all to have, and I will do that for sure. So,
right, good deal. Once we get those slides posted, county agents should be able to access those. So if you want that slide set, either email me or your county agent, and we'll be sure to get those to you. If you have any more questions, be sure to send those in the chat. As far as attendance goes for everybody, our Zoom account automatically records attendance. So as long as you were logged in for tonight's webinar, you should be good to go for attendance for tonight's webinar too. And if anyone else has any questions beyond the webinars, please feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Mason or your county agent, and we'll be sure to get those squared away immediately. But thank you again, Kristen, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you speaking with us. And if there are no other questions, I think we'll end. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you.